The greatest drama ever told didn't start on a battlefield. It started with a wedding. This is the story of the Trojan War. But not the version you think you know. We're going back to the very beginning, to the gods, their grudges, and the chain of choices that led to one of the most legendary conflicts in all of Greek mythology. And it all starts with a headache. Specifically, Zeus's headache. According to the myth, the king of the gods had a problem. Humanity had grown too large. Not in an environmental sense. The gods weren't worried about carbon footprints. The issue was far more self-serving. There were simply too many humans, and too little divine attention to go around. Zeus decided something had to be done. A great reduction. A war on a massive scale. But he wasn't about to get his hands dirty. So instead, he used a wedding. The bride was Thetis, a sea nymph of extraordinary beauty. But Thetis came with a prophecy attached, a terrifying one. Any son born of Thetis would surpass his father in greatness. That meant if Zeus fathered her child, his throne was at risk. So despite his feelings for her, Zeus made a calculated decision. He arranged for Thetis to marry a mortal hero named Peleus. A grand wedding was held. Every god was invited. Almost every god. The one goddess left off the guest list was Eris, the goddess of discord. And she was furious. She showed up anyway, walked into the celebration, and tossed a single golden apple onto the table. Engraved on it were 3 simple words: for the most beautiful. That one apple threw the entire divine order into chaos. 3 goddesses immediately stepped forward to claim it. Aphrodite, goddess of love; Athena, goddess of wisdom; and Hera, queen of the gods herself. Zeus, wisely, wanted nothing to do with the decision. So he passed the judgment to a mortal. That mortal was Paris, a prince of Troy, living quietly as a shepherd at the time. The 3 goddesses appeared before him and each offered a bribe. Hera offered power over kingdoms and nations. Athena offered skill in battle and unmatched wisdom. Aphrodite offered the most beautiful woman in the world as his wife. Paris chose Aphrodite. He chose love over power, beauty over strategy. And in that single moment, he made enemies of 2 of the most powerful goddesses in existence. Hera and Athena didn't just dislike Troy after that. They despised it. And divine grudges don't fade. The woman Aphrodite promised him was Helen of Sparta. And here's where the myth gets complicated. Helen was already married, and not to just anyone. Her husband was Menelaus, the powerful king of Sparta. Paris traveled to Sparta, and with Aphrodite's help, Helen left with him for Troy. Now, was she taken against her will? That's actually one of the most debated questions in all of Greek mythology. Some versions portray her as a victim. Others suggest she went willingly. The ancient sources themselves can't quite agree. But regardless of what really drove her decision, the outcome was the same. Menelaus was humiliated. And humiliation, for a king, demands a response. That response came through his brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. Agamemnon saw an opportunity. He rallied the kings and warriors of Greece under one banner. The stated reason was honor. The real motivation was far less noble. Troy was rich, Troy was powerful, and it was sitting on one of the most strategically valuable trade routes in the ancient world. The call to war went out across Greece. One king refused to answer. Odysseus of Ithaca, the craftiest man in the myth, had no interest in sailing off to fight a war that wasn't really his. So he pretended to be mad. He hitched a donkey to a plow and started farming salt fields, muttering nonsense and acting completely unhinged. It might have worked, too. But Agamemnon's messenger, a man named Palamedes, saw through it. He placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus directly in the path of the plow. And just like that, the act was over. A father couldn't run over his own child. Odysseus stopped, and his sanity was instantly obvious. He had no choice but to join the war. But from that day forward, he never forgave Palamedes. And later in the myth, Odysseus fabricates evidence against him and has him executed. The Trojan War cycle is full of moments like this. where survival and betrayal are tangled together so tightly you can barely tell them apart. The Greek fleet gathered at the port of Aulis. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of warriors, ready to sail, but the winds never came. The sea was dead calm, and the ships couldn't move. The reason, according to the myth, was divine punishment. Agamemnon had killed a sacred deer, belonging to the goddess Artemis during a hunt. And to make it worse, he had boasted that he was a greater hunter than the goddess herself. Artemis was not amused. She locked away the winds. The prophet Calchas delivered the verdict. The only way to restore the winds and sail for Troy was for Agamemnon to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon was devastated, but the pressure from his generals was immense. In a desperate and calculated deception, he lured Iphigenia to Aulis by telling her she was to be married to Achilles. She came believing it was a wedding. It was not. Achilles, for his part, was outraged when he discovered his name had been used this way. But by then it was too late to stop what had been set in motion. Iphigenia stood at the altar. Depending on which version you follow, the story ends differently. In one version, Artemis takes pity on her at the last moment, replaces her with a deer and spirits the girl away to serve as a priestess in a distant land. In another version, there is no rescue. Either way, Agamemnon carried the weight of that day for the rest of his life. And so did his wife, Clytemnestra. She never forgot what her husband chose to do at that altar. That wound became the seed of everything that would come after the war. The winds came, the fleet set sail, and the Trojan War began. For 10 years, the plains outside Troy ran red with the losses of both sides. Achilles, arguably the greatest warrior in Greek mythology, fought with terrifying skill, but when his closest companion Patroclus was killed, something in him broke. His grief twisted into something darker, a consuming rage that even he couldn't fully control. On the Trojan side, Hector fought not for glory or for pride, but for his family and his city. Every battle he entered could be his last, and he knew it. He kept fighting anyway. Everything, in the end, traces back to Paris's choice. A single decision, made in a quiet field by a young man, who chose love over power. That choice moved the gods, shook kingdoms, and echoed through 10 years of war. What the myth keeps asking us, even now, is a question worth sitting with. Were the gods really in control? Or were they just a mirror, reflecting back the jealousy, vanity, ambition, and grief that live inside all of us? The gods in this story don't feel distant or divine. They feel remarkably human, and maybe that's the point. The heroes of Greek mythology are tragic, not because fate crushed them from above, but because they chose, and they suffered the consequences of those choices. We see ourselves in them. We always have. That's why these stories are still here, still being told, thousands of years later. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.